It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning, everyone. From the Jerome L. Greene Performance Space today, our street-level theater, where we are doing the show live today before a packed house, a sold-out performance in front of about 120 people, taking up pretty much all the seats we have here. And okay, 120 seats isn't exactly Yankee Stadium, but it's still a sellout, so we will take what we can get. Give yourselves a round of applause for being here today. And they deserve a round of applause because, as we all know, half of success is simply showing up, which I think is also Donald Trump's formula at the UN today. If he just shows up for the annual speech by the President of the United States and doesn't hit golf balls into the faces of the other heads of state, people will say, hey, that was pretty good. If he just shows up and doesn't say, America first, we're the world's only superpower, and you're not, nya, and we're going to use all our power and all our wealth only to benefit ourselves, so take your universal healthcare systems and shove them, people will say, hey, he's really starting to get this diplomacy thing now. If he just shows up and basically speaks in empty platitudes and doesn't call Angela Merkel ugly or call Nikki Haley my Indian American over here, people will say, oh, very presidential. He didn't ad-lib off his teleprompter copy. Maybe this is a turning point in his relationship with the rest of the world. If he doesn't even give a speech, but just shows up, well, half of success is just showing up. Maybe especially in Donald Trump's case, but also for everyone else. So congratulations on being here today. Later this hour, we will stream the President's UN speech live on WNYC.org. We'll also play highlights from it here on the show. And also, listeners, we're streaming live video of the Brian Lehrer Show in the Greene Space, as we always do when we're in the Greene Space. So if you want to watch the radio as well as listen to the radio today, you can do that on WNYC.org or on Facebook. And you will be rewarded with great guests. We have the first dreamer, Tereza Lee, who was a child brought here illegally by her South Korean parents and was establishing herself as a talented classical pianist. Then before she could be deported, she got onto Senator Dick Durbin's radar screen and got DACA-like protection and became the model for DACA and the DREAM Act. Tereza Lee will tell her story, and she will perform on the Greene Space piano for us as well. Also, another great immigrant, Anthony Appiah, originally from Ghana, now one of our leading intellectuals of philosophy and moral identity and law, and you might know him best more in the pop culture context of being the ethicist in the New York Times Magazine. Anthony Appiah will be here today. And our own Nancy Solomon, managing editor of New Jersey Public Radio, will tell us about her latest block party, where people with political differences who live on the same New Jersey block get together and share their views and try to actually come together. Nancy Solomon with excerpts from her series Block Party coming up here in the Greene Space. And we begin with a very special guest, Joan Walsh, National Affairs Correspondent for The Nation magazine. She was editor-in-chief of Salon for 6 years. If you know her face, it's probably because she's also an MSNBC contributor and shows up there a lot. And she's the author of the book, What's the Matter with White People? Finding Our Way in the Next America. Please welcome Joan Walsh. Hey, Joan.
Hi, Brian. Thanks, everybody. It's great to be here.
Welcome back to WNYC. Is this your first time in the Greene Space?
I believe it is, yes.
And Joan's going to do double duty for us today. We'll talk for a while now, and then later, after President Trump delivers his UN address, Joan will come back and do some analysis of it for us. You ready to do both the deep dive and the broadcast news instant analysis?
Yes, I am, because it's going to be really easy. I will not say the word pivot, but other people probably will. If he just reads the teleprompter, he's presidential.
Where have I heard that before?
Yeah.
You don't play the piano, do you?
Oh, I dropped my lessons. Oh, my parents would be so disappointed that I could be here and play the piano, too.
All right, but we'll leave.
So only double duty, not triple duty.
Exactly. We'll leave the piano to Tereza Lee.
Right.
I see you wrote an article in The Nation, and you were just on one of The Nation's podcasts saying Mike Pence would be worse for America than Donald Trump, but Trump should be impeached anyway.
More or less.
Do I have that right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we know Mike Pence's agenda is very far to the right, I think, of even the Republican Party. But, my feeling has been we need to get to the bottom of what happened in Russia, and we may never do that. But in the meantime, I would rather have a president who is not calling the North Korean leader Rocket Man on Twitter. I mean, I think that the damage that Donald Trump can do to our country, even by, retweeting a shot of him hitting Hillary Clinton with a golf ball, the constant diminishing of our culture and degradation of our culture, I think that Pence would be awful, but I also think he'd be really beatable. And, the X factor with Trump, I know you all read the papers all the time and see his voters think he's doing great. And, his voters, there was a piece in the Times yesterday, his voters blame the Republican Party. They're Trumpists. They're not necessarily Republicans. And so I think he's got such an X factor. I believe that Pence would be very, very easy to defeat.
Do you think the Russia investigation is going to wind up with impeachment?
I don't know. I can't say that yet. I mean, Dianne Feinstein is telling us the whole investigation could take another year and a half. I don't know. Impeachment is really a political decision as well as a legal one. So no matter what Mueller comes up with, it really depends on the wisdom and the political courage of the leadership, which is now Republican. That could change in 2018, I suppose.
I try to resist the temptation to do a Russia investigation segment every day.
Right.
So as to make sure we talk about the policies that really affect everyone's lives, like healthcare and immigration. But it's such a fascinating procedural day after day with Mueller and the various investigations in Congress. It's like getting addicted to Law and Order. And like when we learned recently about that meeting with Russians that took place last June, and suddenly Donald Trump Jr. and Kushner and Manafort had to go from saying we never colluded with the Russians, which they'd said about 1 billion times, to, well, they offered to collude and we happily accepted, but that's okay. Everyone takes opposition research. Right. Does the magnitude of the original lie get larger by the week?
Of course it gets larger, but I don't know. Because it's such a steady stream of revelations, I'm not sure we're all taking it in. And that's why I actually applaud you for, not doing it every day and trying to come at it when there's something that really makes a difference or when you can sum up the threads, the trends. We have now learned that Paul Manafort was wiretapped, that they got, I think, 2 FISA wiretaps on him. And Roger Stone is on Twitter, if you haven't been on Twitter this morning, raging about it, saying he was caught in these wiretaps. Well, yeah, you sure were. And I don't, it's interesting to know that you're so upset. So the questions become, was the president-elect recorded? Were his sons, his advisors, what really were they going after in terms of Manafort, and why did they did it before the election and also after the election? That implies some connection to the election, I would say.
By the way, listeners, Trump has begun a speech at the UN, and we are streaming that at WNYC.org, or you can stay with us and wait for Joan to come back on with highlights a little later in the program. So you have your choice. And again, if you're just joining us, Brian Lehrer live with you from the Greene Space today. And when we're in the Greene Space, we stream live video of the show, so you can actually watch the show as another choice at WNYC.org or Facebook. Speaking of which, before we get off Russia, how much do you think Facebook might turn out to be the missing link here? We don't know what happened after that Trump Tower meeting last June.
Right.
But maybe it was like, okay, great, my digital people, we call your digital people, and we'll get lots of lies about Hillary out there, and then dump all these DNC emails on WikiLeaks so nobody can say it's us.
Right. I mean, the way that they released the emails, starting with the first day of the Democratic National Committee convention, I was there. It's normally a time for the party to come together, and there's a real celebratory feel. It was a nightmare. It was nightmarish. Some of you might have watched it on TV. There was real anger from the Bernie Sanders folks, kind of understandably, because it was too raw. No one had really analyzed the email to explain. We were just, reading aloud some of the more salacious, gossipy parts. It really cast a pall on the whole week. I mean, I think they recovered. Senator Sanders did a lot to help that, and it turned into a good event. But there was always an undercurrent of, unhappiness and threatened walkouts. There was a walkout, et cetera. So I think, when the Access Hollywood tape, it was the same day or the next day, Access Hollywood tape comes out, suddenly someone, WikiLeaks, is leaking John Podesta's email, so that we have these rival stories. And then the story that got blotted out that same day was the first time the intelligence communities came out together and said, we have evidence of Russian meddling in this election. We don't know. They wouldn't say on whose behalf, even though I think they knew. So, there was just such a smart timing of the leaks. The other thing that you learn if you read about Facebook, and if you read Josh Greene's excellent book about Steve Bannon, even though he's gone, he still matters. They were doing so much with data, and they were bragging about it, last year, and no one necessarily believed them because you can't see a lot of it. They really have dark posts on Facebook, so you and I would never see ads, the kinds of ads that they might have run. We learned that they were really trying to dampen African American turnout, so African American people might have seen those ads, and especially if they had any notion that that these Facebook users were maybe not so hot on Hillary. Maybe they were Bernie supporters, or they did a lot with Black Lives Matter content on Facebook. How do they know enough to kind of micro-target the parts of the Democratic base that were wobbly? And so it
You mean
really...
that could have come from the Trump campaign?
Yes.
Because Bannon and them were so good at microdemographics through
yes,
data,
yes,
feeding it,
and then Facebook
to the right
can do it too. And I don't know, some of you might have seen,
not proven, but an
not
interesting
proven,
theory.
no, absolutely. But and then the final not final, there will be many more, but there was a really interesting BBC video with the woman who ran his Cambridge Analytica and what was it called, Project Apollo, which is Alamo. It's based in San Antonio, so that's really interesting politics too. And she was boasting that Facebook embedded staffers with her and really helped them hone their message. So Facebook has a lot to answer for. They did offer this kind of help to other candidates, but as far as we know, it was never as sizable as with the Trump campaign.
Joan Walsh from The Nation, our guest here in the Greene Space. And listeners listening on the radio, we can take phone calls as usual. For Joan Walsh, what would you like to say or ask her based on any of her columns or her MSNBC appearances or what she's just saying here today or anything in the news today? 212-433-WNYC, 433-9692. And Greene Space audience, raise your hand. We have people with microphones, and we'll come around and take your questions too. Don't think you can come to the Greene Space and just sit back and be a conventional audience. We want participation. So if you've got a question or a thought, raise your hand and we'll get you in. Joan, your book, What's the Matter with White People? Finding Our Way in the Next America, that came out in 2012. Considering the role of white identity politics in the election of Donald Trump, did you see it coming in some way more than others, perhaps, after immersing yourself and researching your book?
Yeah, I think I did. I mean, Donald Trump is even in my book because my book goes way back almost to the founding. I try to tell the story of how the white working class fell out with the Democratic Party over issues of race and the Vietnam War, et cetera. But I really did zero in on the last few years, the Obama 2008 and then the re-election. It came out on the eve of the re-election, but I got to cover quite a lot of what had gone on. And I go into the fact that Mitt Romney and Newt Gingrich, I'm not sure if any of the rest of the 2012 wonders, really made a point of courting Donald Trump and seeking his endorsement at a time when, what was Donald Trump famous for politically? One thing, his birther crusade demanding to see the president's birth certificate. So they were already using whiteness. They were already using identity politics. They were already using the way that Trump had so brilliantly stoked the fear and the suspicion that we might have a Muslim in the White House. Maybe we had a Kenyan, and just the feeling of otherness that so many Republicans immediately projected on President Obama. That's why they were there.
Do you remember there was a meme for a while in 2012 during the Romney campaign, started by someone's article in some publication, I actually don't remember where, calling Mitt Romney the whitest man in America because he was like an old-fashioned 1950s dad. Does it really turn out that Donald Trump and Steve Bannon are the whitest men in America? And it actually has a whole different meaning than an episode of Father Knows Best?
Yes, I think that was funny. This is not funny. I think I termed Romney and Ryan white and whiter. But I was wrong. You could get whiter still. Yeah, I think, although I criticized Mitt Romney and I criticized lots of Republicans for using, we know about the Southern strategy that Richard Nixon used. It actually had a Northern component. They were really looking at those white ethnics, like my Irish Catholic working class family, luring them to the Republican Party. That all went on. But I don't think that we ever saw a mainstream, non-David Duke political candidate be so willing to traffic in the fears of white people and just such ugly stereotypes about immigrants, about Muslims, about Black Lives Matter as being some kind of thuggish group. I think he really understood that you could play white identity politics much more openly than anyone had ever done it, and I think that's a lot of why he won.
Let's take a phone call. We're going to go to Joe on line 3. Joe in Cliffside Park. You're on WNYC with Joan Walsh. Hi, Joe.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Quick question. You guys had talked a little bit about a couple of minutes ago about Facebook targeting, right? That type of digital marketing. That kind of strategy or tactics available to anyone, any big brand, any individual, any political party. The implication seems to be, hey, the Republicans use this in a bad way because they use data, because they use targeting. I don't think that's true. Any expert within digital marketing knows that tactic's available to anyone. And why didn't the Democrats use it? Why didn't alternative parties use it? Is it a critique of the Republicans for using that strategy, or is it just a critique of using that marketing tactic in general? I guess I'm a bit confused what the negative part of that is.
That's a fair question. I think for me, the question is, can we learn from Facebook whether there was collusion in the sense that would be either illegal or a scandal with Russia, and Facebook isn't telling us enough to learn that? But Joan, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's one thing. Facebook first said that's crazy. We had no effect. Now they've come out and said that, yes, a few hundred, we found some Russian accounts. We don't, it's illegal. So this is one issue, is legality. It's illegal for foreign nationals to put money into our elections. So that's one thing. Did that happen? The other thing I would say is we have tried to have transparency in American politics. And we passed some laws regarding advertising so that, a candidate has to say, and I approve this message. You can have outside groups, but these kinds of ads are usually available. I'm not going to see, what everyone's seeing in Wisconsin, but if I want to, I can. Scholars, reporters, other political activists can go look at the entire archive of what other campaigns have done. When you have these dark posts that literally disappear, Facebook is saying they're not even sure they can conjure them up again, or whether they feel like it's legal to do that. I think that's in a whole different category. I don't mean to sound alarmist or, I guess I do mean to sound alarmist. I'll take that back.
Also, foreign individuals could not go to a broadcast station and buy campaign advertising.
Exactly.
That would be illegal.
Right.
But they can do it through Facebook because it's not regulated in the same way. That doesn't exactly respond to the caller's question, which in a way is a fair point. I mean, I think enough political history to know that the two parties have gone sort of back and forth on who's better at a particular moment on micro demographics. I think the Reagan people beat the Democrats hand down when the thing was direct mail and older technologies in the 80s. And then the Obama people with all their young tech volunteers trounced McCain and Romney in that respect. And now the Trump world seems to have beaten the Clinton world.
Right. And a lot of what they're doing is absolutely legal and fine, and they are better at it, it would seem.
I think we have a question here in the Greene Space audience. Hi there.
Hi. So I was curious what you think about Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi cooperating with Trump on DACA in a way that Trump suddenly can come off as the guy who saved DACA at a time when right now people who have to reapply for DACA are struggling to come up with $495 just for the application. This has to be done by October 5th, and suddenly Trump can come off as, the hero on the white horse, or maybe, to be politically correct, the black horse.
And control room, cue up the Andrew Cuomo clip on Chuck Schumer and DACA that we have, and we'll play that in just a second. But Joan, what would you say to our audience member?
I have my worries about it too. I think that a lot of the DACA folks, Pelosi was protested yesterday pretty harshly. I think that they wish that they had said, we will do nothing until we have a solution, that this vague language about, Trump's support doesn't count. I mean, I believe Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats are going to try to move a discharge position to get DACA, the last version of the bill, to the floor to see if it gets Republican and Democratic votes, and that will call Trump's bluff, because either he twists arms about DACA and he's tweeting about it all day, or he's not. But yeah, I think they might have settled too soon for too little. I'm not sure.
One thing that Andrew Cuomo said when he was on our show yesterday is that he seems to think Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are getting rolled. He didn't say rolled. That's my characterization of what we're about to hear. But getting rolled, in effect, by Trump on that possible DACA deal of letting them stay in the country in exchange for funding for more border security, even if not a wall per se. Listen.
In some ways, I feel like we're negotiating against ourselves. We now have DACA, right? It was done by an executive order by President Obama. But DACA is in place for the promise of, Congress will now confirm DACA. That just puts us where we are. And in exchange, more money for border protection, quote unquote, the wall. But not a wall, just more money for border protection. We already spent $4 billion on border protection on the southern border. How much more money than the $4 billion? And where are we going to get it from?
I guess my only reservation about his point is that we don't have DACA. It was an executive order, and this president can rescind it, and he did. He gave them 6 months to come up with a plan. So it's not as though we could just continue on with the status quo, and if Chuck and Nancy, as I guess we call them now, don't make a deal, these people will be free. They will not be. So a deal is important. The question is how good a deal, how quickly, and have they given up some leverage that they should have held on to? Senator
Kirsten Gillibrand was on our program Friday just after she co-sponsored Sanders' Medicare for All bill. And I asked her about Hillary Clinton's remark, which is either in her new book or that she said on TV in conjunction with the new book. And I know you've done a lot on the Clinton book, that Bernie was taking utopian positions while Clinton was trying to be the grown-up in the room. But next to Bernie came out looking like a school mom, and it sort of wasn't fair. Here's Gillibrand's take on that.
I really think that argument's beside the point. I think Hillary Clinton inspired millions of people around the world, around the globe, by not only vying for the presidency of the United States, but working her hardest to get there. And she believed in a lot of things that most Democrats believe in. She had her own policy proposals. And I think both approaches are fine. There's nothing wrong with saying the practical approach is to get from A to B. And there's nothing wrong with Bernie saying, yeah, but my ideal is a single payer. So I don't think we should be attacking fellow Democrats on what they decide to campaign on, because that's what's coming out of their heart.
What do you think about that whole policy dynamic?
One thing that I'm kind of shocked, this book has been so criticized, and there's so much said about, she doesn't take any blame. She really does. I have a piece in The Nation, actually a debate with a friend who's a Bernie supporter, so it's interesting. But there's a specific passage in the book that has gotten no attention where she says, I mean, first of all, she says, maybe I was not the person for this time of profound anger. But she also says, it was frustrating for Bernie to always, seem to be moving the goalposts, but it made me think about maybe the Democrats have lost that sense of overarching lofty policy, and that we need those goals. Maybe I was so hung up on, I don't want tuition-free college, but not for the rich. But we also know that some of our universal programs like Social Security and Medicare have been very hard to touch because they are universal, and that she learned that from Bernie. So it's just really frustrating to see that people, wanted to pull out the joke she made about the pony, which I thought was kind of funny, but don't listen to what she says she learned. And I think that a lot of the party has learned along with her that stand up for what you ultimately believe. And if you think that the end goal should be Medicare for all or single payer, say it, but also allow for a long transition and understand what it's going to take to get from A to B to C to Z. And I think there are two approaches, actually. She was really good on A to F, and he was always talking about Z. We need both in the party.
I don't know the pony joke. Is it something that can be repeated on the radio?
Yeah, I'm gonna blow it. But Bernie Sanders wants everybody to have a pony. And Hillary's like, well, but how are we going to pay for all those ponies? And then commentators like, Hillary hates ponies, hashtag Hillary hates ponies. Hillary's like, no, I love ponies, hashtag Hillary, flip-flop Hillary, Hillary steals from Senator Sanders. It might have one more iteration, but you get the gist. She couldn't win.
We have another question here in the Greene Space. Hi there.
Hi there. Sorry if I sound nervous. Getting back to the Russia thing for just a moment. Given Paul Manafort's very long history going back to the Soviet era, and given that he was wiretapped before the election and after the election, how about the conspiracy theory that says he's been a Soviet spy, and then transitioned into Russia? He's been working for the Russian satellites and so on for a very long time. I think he's a Soviet spy.
That's a theory. I don't think we have evidence for that, but he does go way back. He and Roger Stone, under Ronald Reagan, set up a lobbying firm that was known as, I think, Torturers Row, because they represented all the most horrible, tyrants of the 80s. He's, even, I think, there's some text that somebody leaked of one of his own daughters saying, we've lived on blood money. So I don't think he's a great guy, but I'm not ready to call him a Soviet spy.
On Medicare for All, or really off Medicare for All, because right now there's a bigger healthcare story, I think, than Medicare for All, which is still a long-term prospect, still a Z, as you put it, even though more Democrats are signing on. The Republicans are making one more go at repealing and replacing Obamacare before the deadline of, I guess it's September 30th, which is the deadline under the so-called reconciliation parliamentary procedure to get it through the Senate with 51 votes rather than 60. And there's this Lindsey Graham, Bill Cassidy bill that some progressives are saying might be the worst repeal and replace version yet, but might actually get rammed through without all that much media coverage so far. Do you have a sense of how big a threat that is?
I think it's a real threat. I think there has been more media coverage. I think, people have been tuning in the last few days. But again, remember, just like with the House bill's dead. Everybody goes to work on other things, and then the House bill's back and it passes. I think there's a lot of worry about that. I think, I still hold out hope for John McCain, because he said he wanted to do this under regular order. He said he wanted hearings. They are not even getting a CBO score to see how many people will lose their coverage and how much it will save or cost or move money around. I heard Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin on TV this morning saying, we don't need that. We've had them already. This is a different bill. You haven't had it already. It's just so outrageous the way they bend and break the rules. And for John McCain to have come back when he's so sick, and to have made an impassioned plea for a bipartisan bill, I don't see how he votes for this.
But he's holding himself out as undecided. I know one new development is that the governor of Arizona came out for it, and that is said to be possibly influential with McCain.
He said he was going to listen to the governor for sure. He didn't say that was his only concern, but he did say that, and so that was definitely bad news. That was good news for people who want to repeal the bill.
You know, New York has a state single-payer bill with almost enough votes in the state legislature to pass. My understanding is they're about one vote shy in the state Senate. They already have the Assembly. And I asked Governor Cuomo on this program yesterday, if the Republicans do break Obamacare, would you sign a state single-payer bill if the legislature actually gets one to you? And here's what he said.
If they were to pass it and it was not incongruous with what the federal government would do to us, I think it's a very exciting possibility. But I think it's going to be a federal play. And our funding system basically relies on Medicaid from the feds. And if they turn off that valve or slow that valve, there is no way we're going to be able to make that up in this state, no matter what.
And I think the key to his answer was really there. If they do break Obamacare in Washington, which would mean a lot less money from Medicaid to the states, then he's really saying no. And I know you've spoken before on this show earlier this summer about the difficulty of doing single payer on the state level.
Right. I mean, you know, he's correct in referring to it's a federal play. So many, there's like 58 different federal programs that that fund some kind of health care in this country. And so I paid a lot of attention to the California bill because it got pretty far, but it also became very controversial. Democrats really split over that bill, and the problem was that you would need waivers. You would need umpteen waivers from the federal government. You would need to keep all your Medicaid money. If you're doing real single payer, you're going to want to bring in Medicare, which I think is a little dicey. But I don't think you can do that at the state level, sadly. I think Vermont, great progressive state, tried it. They failed. There's just too much of a federal role between money and red tape. They both matter.
Joan, I know you're going to go and listen to Trump's UN. Oh, by the way, listeners on the radio, can you hear that? We have our first ever Brian Lehrer show, Greene Space baby.
Baby.
Who's got the baby? Raise your hand so I can see you. Oh, hi there. What's the baby's name? Amalia. Hi, Amalia. Amalia, you're on the radio. Okay, you're off to a good start. You can put it on your resume when you start applying for media jobs. Age 4 months. Brian Lehrer show. All right. So, Joan, you're going to go and listen to Trump's UN speech.
I am.
And then come back with a few highlights. Here's one pull quote from the speech, which is in progress now. At least he talks in the abstract against authoritarianism when he's put on the spot like this. He says, authority and authoritarian powers seek to collapse the values, the systems and alliances that prevented conflict and tilted the world toward freedom since World War II.
That's great. He saw those words on the teleprompter. Maybe he'll read it again when he gets home tonight and think about it.
Just promise me when you come back, you won't say he was very presidential just because he didn't call the president of Pakistan a macaca.
I promise. And no pivot. Won't use the word pivot, I promise.
Please thank Joan Walsh. And again, listeners, we're streaming the Trump UN speech at WNYC.org if you want to hear it, or you can stay with us and wait for Joan to come back on with highlights and analysis. Brian Lehrer on WNYC, live from the Greene Space. More after this.
On the eve of elections in Germany, the far right is flexing its muscles, pointing to refugees as a threat to the nation.
Islam does not belong to Germany, and it doesn't go together with our values.
And stirring memories of World War II.
We have not seen this type of discourse really since the Nazi Reich.
The politics of hate in Germany on the next Reveal. Tonight at 8 on 93.9 FM, WNYC.
WNYC supporters include Rodgers and Hammerstein's Carousel on Broadway, starring Joshua Henry, Jesse Mueller, and Renee Fleming. Choreographed by Justin Peck and directed by Jack O'Brien. Previews begin February 28th. Tickets on sale now at telecharge.com. Urban Stems, offering same-day flower delivery service. Every flower is sourced directly from farms, and delivery is available to homes or offices 7 days a week in New York City. More at urbanstems.com. Happiness delivered. Support for the Greene Space, WNYC's street-level state-of-the-art events venue and broadcast studio at 44 Charlton Street, is provided by the Jerome L. Greene Foundation.
WNYC, independent journalism in the public interest. 93.9 FM and AM 820. NPR News and the New York Conversation.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC, live from the Jerome L. Greene Performance Space today, our ground floor theater. With me now, our own Nancy Solomon, managing editor of New Jersey Public Radio and the leader of our project called Voting Block, a WNYC collaboration that examines the conversations New Jerseyans are having with their neighbors across the political spectrum ahead of the gubernatorial election this November. Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Brian.
And let's see, Greene Space audience, if you're from New Jersey, let us really hear you.
All right. That's pretty good.
Pretty good, right?
Yeah.
A good New Jersey contingent, right?
A third of our listeners are from New Jersey and live in New Jersey.
And I think based on that, about a third of our Greene Space audience.
Exactly.
So people with the gumption to get up in the morning and come to a 10 o'clock show across the river, awesome. Double round of applause just for being here. So you want to reestablish for us what Voting Block is, who we're collaborating with, and what block you're getting to know the neighbors on?
Yes. So it's a collaboration between 5 other news organizations in New Jersey, the Bergen Record, NJ Spotlight, WHYY, which is our sister station in Philadelphia and covers South Jersey, WBGO, our sister public radio station in Newark, and the Asbury Park Press. And so each of us picked one block. And the idea was to really twofold, to have a conversation with people over politics today where we could try to create a conversation and civil discourse at a moment when the two sides are unable to talk to each other. And then to also drill down to one block and find out what people are, really get to know people and find out what they're thinking about the governor's race, which this is one of 2 governor's races in the country coming up. The vote is in November. And it's really a crucial moment for, dare I say, a pivot, a moment for New Jersey to pick a new governor after 8 years of Chris Christie.
Joan can't say pivot, but you can.
It may be a pivot, it may not.
And yes, I think a lot of people don't realize how important these 2 elections are, because it is only 2. It's weird for New Jersey and Virginia to even be having gubernatorial elections this year, because it's off the cycle of the rest of the country. It's usually on the even years, the same year as congressional and presidential elections. Only Virginia and New Jersey have a gubernatorial election this year. So it could be maybe more in Virginia than here. But then again, we do have a Republican governor at the moment. So maybe there's some indication of the national mood and, a bellwether for what might happen in the 2018 midterms, given what happens in Virginia and New Jersey.
Yeah, and it's been a little surprising how far ahead in the polls the Democrat is. And then on the other hand, it's not so surprising given that Chris Christie has the lowest favorability ratings of any governor in the country. So, there are a lot of problems that have not been solved that, seem to have been ignored because Chris Christie was so focused on his national political career and ambitions. So I think there's a lot of, anger and disgust, and that seems to be playing out in this race. But it's super important because the New Jersey governor is an incredibly powerful governor as far as the structure of what that person is allowed to do and not do. The most powerful governorship in the country. And, if we're gonna get things solved, we need a governor who's really focused on our problems.
Most powerful governor in the country by what measure?
line item veto, no other statewide political office that's elected, no attorney general that's elected. So line item veto means anything in the state budget, he can just cross it out. So, you know, and this has come up in our talks with the folks on my block, you know, that they do feel that this election is going to change things in their daily lives in a way that the fighting that's going on about Trump isn't necessarily affecting them so much.
So tell us about the block that you're reporting on.
Right. So the block starts in South Orange and ends in West Orange. It's mostly in West Orange. It starts with houses that were built in the early 1900s, sort of craftsman bungalows, big old shade trees. People are middle to upper middle class. And then the block had ended. It's a dead end, and at one time it had ended there. And then in the 1950s, 1960s, the whole second half of the block was built. It ends in a cul-de-sac, and it's more like your classic, when you think New Jersey, of ranch homes on a cul-de-sac. The cul-de-sac end of the block, it has is more working class, has more people of color, and the more affluent side of the block is more white, but also racially mixed.
And you have a clip of a conversation, a 35-second clip between two neighbors from Hillside Terrace. Want to set this up for us?
Yeah. So this is an argument happening between Arun Vartlamani and Deborah Goldstein, two neighbors, and what's interesting about it is, so every time we talk politics, we've gotten into these huge fights about Donald Trump. So even though folks are largely Democrats, there are some conservative Republicans on the block. And so what this fight is about how Arun feels that he should not be expected to say that he respects the politics of the Republican conservative who lives a few doors down from him, named Len Morozak.
And Arun is the first voice.
Do you think any one of us here can change anyone's view?
No, but maybe I misunderstood. But it sounded like you were saying there's no need to be nice. Is what I heard.
True. If you voted for Hitler, there is no reason for me to be nice to you.
I understand.
Come on, there is just no. I mean, I know we're taking extreme examples. Nobody here is calling anybody that. But if you stand for a position, if you are David Duke, and you stood for governor in Alabama or wherever you stood, and you voted for that guy, I have no respect for you.
I understand.
I'm sorry.
It becomes much more difficult, I agree.
No.
Wow. So that little excerpt, which I didn't hear until just now, it's so troubling to me, and it's also so representative of sort of the meta conversation that's going on in America today, right? Because it's not just about, do you agree with this policy or not? It's, should I even respect your different point of view and have anything to do with you?
Yeah, and exactly. And this went on for about 30 minutes. And not arguing about the politics of Trump, arguing about whether or not somebody can be respected if they voted for Trump. And Len responded to Arun by saying, you have to at least respect me. This is what's going on across the country, and this is what's going on right here, and we can't have this level of hate in our politics. And I thought, Arun was making an interesting point, though, because, this is the kind of dismay that people are feeling, that Arun was he was very clear about the fact that he's not talking about the policies of Donald Trump. He said, George Bush, Ronald Reagan, George Bush Sr., I disagreed with their policies, but they were essentially good guys. They were respectable people. He's saying Donald Trump is a bad person. He groped women. He lies. He didn't speak out against Nazis. So, he's saying, how do you respect someone who voted for me? He's saying, 90% of the time you're a good, you're, as a neighbor, I like you as my neighbor. But if we're going to talk politics, I'm not going to show respect. And this blew up because everybody else says, no, what are we doing here if we can't show that we can respect each other? So
and this came up when we were doing our national call-in called Indivisible in the first 100 days of the Trump administration, because we were trying to do two basic things on that show. We were trying to call it like it was and really, bust them if they needed to be busted on how they were breaking down important norms of democracy in the United States in the first 100 days. But we were also trying to get people out of their bubbles. And we were on in a lot of public radio stations in the South, and a lot of people who felt themselves to be very earnest, who voted for Trump, were invited to call in. And some of the blowback that we got was, wait, anybody who voted for Trump, kind of like you were just saying, they had to at least, whether they're racist and sexist and et cetera-ist themselves, they had to at least be comfortable enough with Trump calling Mexicans rapists and drug dealers, Access Hollywood, et cetera, that these people just, I don't care what they think.
Right. And we've gotten to this point every time we've gotten together. So, it's kind of an interesting project. It's, because each time we get together, then we put something on the air. So they're all listening to this. So, but also, two people from the Saltzman Institute of War and Peace Studies at Columbia University reached out to me after hearing some of the stories we've done and offered to come and mediate. So I brought them to this meeting, and at first everybody went around and said, wait a minute, we don't even understand why you think we need a mediator, because I feel like this has given me so much better understanding, and that we've enjoyed getting together as a block and we really respect each other. And so they were kind of reluctant to even do like the listening exercise that Jessica Bain, the fellow at the Saltzman Institute, wanted to do. But then Arun jumps in and says, no, all this good feely stuff, no, I don't respect anyone who votes for Trump. So then it all blew up again. It was a really fun evening.
So, listeners, we might get to a couple of phone calls. If anybody has a story about your voting block, as the series is called, how have your relationships with your neighbors changed if you are living on a politically diverse block, or anything related to that? 212-433 WNYC for our New Jersey Public Radio Managing Editor Nancy Solomon and voting block reporter, 212-433-9692, or anyone in the Greene Space who has a story to relate or a question that you want to ask Nancy. Raise your hand. We'll come around with a microphone here for the Greene Space audience. And you have a couple of more clips. One of them, I guess, is just a 12-second clip that shows that Hillside Terrace, though it's a Democratic stronghold by and large, still has a few Republicans out there, and here's what one of them had to say.
If you're a Democrat and you look at a Republican, well, you hate children, you want dirty water, you're a bad person, you're the enemy. That is the level, that's where we are today.
That's Len Morozak, who flies an immaculately perfect big American flag out in front of his porch. He has really, held the banner for republicanism and conservatism at these block parties. A couple of the other Republicans on the block haven't been able to make it, so it's been really on Len. And I have just developed such an affection and respect for this man, because he sits there and he takes the abuse, and he gives it right back. And he more than anybody on that block and in that group, he wants to improve discourse and dialogue. He really feels passionate about this. The first time I met him, I knocked on his door, and the minute he heard what it was I was proposing, he loved the idea, and he doesn't miss a block party. So, so I think it's really interesting, and I think probably our most shining moment so far in terms of improving political discourse was when he explained some of the source of his real, I don't know if hatred is too strong of a word, but he really does hate the left. And he talked about the fact that he was a Marine, he fought in the Vietnam War, and he came back to face, veterans being, this is during the anti-war movement in the 60s, and veterans being spit on and yelled at. And that really is, and he came from an immigrant Democratic family, and he voted for George McGovern. And then he came back from the war and had these experiences, and they were so formative in terms of his politics today. And so when people on the block heard that, that was really an incredible moment, where we had somebody who was an anti-war protester who lives, 4 doors down from Len say, you're right. We did not treat veterans well, and I understand where you're coming from.
Let's take a phone call. We're going to go to Amy on line 6. Amy in New Providence, New Jersey. You're on WNYC. Hi, Amy.
Hi, thank you for taking my call.
Go ahead.
So I just wanted to say, I was listening to what Arun said at that meeting, and I kind of agree with him, but I don't know if he said it exactly right, because my feeling is that the Trump supporters want to pretend to have civil discourse with us. But once they have a firm grip on power, what they would like to do to the minorities that they hate, which I'm one, is actually something much worse. They want to kick us out of the country or perhaps kill us all, depending on which supporter you speak with. And that was seen very clearly in the Charlottesville march when they were chanting all sorts of horrible things. And anybody who votes for Trump is giving tacit support to those people. And even though they might pretend to civil discourse, it's a Trojan horse. Once they have power, they're not going to be civil.
Of course, I could just imagine the Republican neighbor who we just heard saying, Amy, you're saying that conservatives want to kill minorities en masse. That's crazy.
Well, I'm not saying conservatives do. I'm saying that many of the Trump supporters do. And they're very open about it. It's not crazy.
I understand what you're saying. I think this is the dilemma of the politics that we face in this moment. And that's why I think it's so fascinating to get a group of people together who have already some relationship to each other. I mean, the block provides this amazing structure for that. I think it's, what Len would also say is, I don't hate people, and because I voted for Trump, I didn't vote for him because I hate people. And yet, at the same time, what Trump stands for, I think for people can rightly question, where is our country going, and what does it mean to support a man who believes and says the things he does? So this is really I can't solve this problem, but we can tell stories about the people who are there trying to work it out.
Let's take a call from Marie on line 5. Marie in Bushwick. You're on WNYC with Nancy Solomon. Hi.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. Your prompt, I guess, what's your voting block, was resonated a lot for me because I have 6 siblings. We're all middle-aged now, very, very close. And I found out after the election from my sister that one of my brothers had voted for Trump. And it's been really difficult, and I haven't really known how to deal with him. I feel like if there was one thing I could count on, which was that we had this sort of foundational set of values, that I feel like he's betrayed.
Did you have a good relationship with your brother before this?
Absolutely.
And so
I miss him. I can't really talk to him, and I miss him.
Why can't you talk to him?
Oh God, because I don't understand. I actually texted him after I found out, and I said, "Is it really true?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Put it this way: I voted for the less of two bad candidates or something." And that created this whole, why do you hate Hillary thing, which is another huge issue for me because I feel like it's rooted in misogyny. And then I'm thinking, is my brother a misogynist? We had the same mother. I don't understand this.
And did you have it out sort of on what the values are? You said you were shocked to find out that, you thought everybody in the family, all your sibs had the same values at least. Did you have it out on values? What value does this represent that's important to you, bro?
No, that's what I'm saying, that in these months since the election, I've had one conversation with him about his children, which, we didn't talk about anything else, but I feel really bereft. I don't know what to do.
Nancy,
I want to say, when this DACA thing happened or the transgender thing, I want to say, This is the man you voted for, this man without compassion. If there's anything that we were raised with, it was fairness and compassion as like bedrock values.
Nancy,
Who
can you help Marie at all based on your voting block reporting? Or how about the person who's the professional mediator who came and joined the project?
You know, she focused on, asking, so what do you want to get out of these conversations? Like, what would be a good outcome? And so, it's rough with a sister and brother. I could say for neighbors, I think people feel like a good outcome is that they can understand each other. They can't change each other's minds, but they can understand where they're coming from. I think that, we have had some we as a country, not on the block, have had some really interesting and deep conversations about where the anger among Trump voters is coming from, and the anger towards elites and the way East Coast and West Coast elites are perceived by the rest of the country, just deep class divisions in this country. I think that could lead us to something positive, trying to understand that stuff.
Maria, I know it's hard. There's so many people in your position.
Harder than I would have imagined.
Thank you for calling.
Thank you.
We have a question here in the Greene Space audience. Who's that? Hi.
Hi. It feels to me like we're bearing witness to a moment in the country that is very deep and very old. Have you found, as this emerges in your communities and in your neighborhoods, and for me personally in my family, that there are even small ways of finding common ground when you know that the person that is looking at you sees you as that antithesis or as that enemy?
I can say a couple things about that. One interesting dynamic on this block is that it has so many gay people. It's just kind of extraordinary that way, both male couples and female couples, some with kids, some without kids. So Len expressed, and I did interviews with folks on the block before we started meeting, and Len expressed how he feels like he can't, in what he called polite society, say, and I'll just boil it down to that he's against gay marriage and basically not comfortable around the idea of, gay people being considered just like everybody else. And then he said, and I said, but Len, you live on just about the gayest block in New Jersey. And he said, and he laughed, and he said, I know. And Deborah across the street, when she had her baby, I brought her a gift. So, and everybody, they know that, and they're still functioning as a neighborhood and as neighbors. So, I guess, there is sort of a disconnect sometimes between what people think is a policy versus, which actually hurts people like me, versus how they respect people individually. And, over the years, that does seem to get better. But I don't know that we're quite solving it. But at any rate, so that's one side. And then the other thing is, at some point, it'd be great if we could talk about how the governor's race is playing out in these conversations, because in some ways that's where people have more in common on the block.
And we only have a few minutes left in the segment, but sure enough, the one other clip that we're going to play, I see, is that Phil Murphy, the Democratic candidate for governor, stopped by one of your block parties. And here's a short clip of what one resident said to the candidate and his response.
So when you work in finance, you believe in capitalism taking care of a lot of stuff. So when you say to make New Jersey fair again, why do you need political intervention when market forces can sort of deal with it?
If you earn the minimum wage in the state of New Jersey and you're a two-income household and you've got 2 kids, you're below the poverty line.
Right. So we invited Phil Murphy and Kim Guandano, the Republican candidate, to come for different nights, and Phil Murphy did come. Part of that might have to do with the fact that Our host is the director of Citizen Action, one of the biggest grassroots political organizations in the state, biggest and oldest. And so she had a connection and could get him to come. And, so that was an interesting exchange. That's Nirmati Shah. She's married to Arun, and she's a Democrat, but, obviously believes in the market. And, Murphy is a very progressive Democrat, despite, there's a distrust of him because he made so much money on Wall Street, but he's actually proposing to tax people who earn a lot of money on Wall Street, and raise the minimum wage and fully fund schools in the way that they haven't been funded in the last 8 years. So there's a lot of optimism actually among Democrats on the block about him, and they really enjoyed meeting him.
He's not the reincarnation of John Corzine?
Well, that remains to be seen. I guess the more I look at him and the more I look at this race, I see him doing things that I don't think John Corzine was very good at. He is working the forces in the Democratic Party really effectively, and that is not, the New Jersey Democratic Party is not an easy party to deal with, even if you're a Democrat. So I would say, he knocked out the two most powerful candidates, potential Democratic candidates in the race really early. He did it with money, but he also did it by meeting the key political leaders in the state, one-on-one over the course of a year and a half, 2 years. So the guy knows how to work the political scene, and I'm not sure Corzine ever had the stomach for it.
Can I ask the New Jersey audience members here, just raise your hand. How many of you got here, and we're in Lower Manhattan, so we're near a path station. How many of you got here by path today? Not many, like 3, including Nancy. How many of you got here by NJ Transit and then subway? A few more. How many of you got here by car? So about the same number as New Jersey Transit. Shout out, one at a time, your top New Jersey issue in the gubernatorial election. Feel free.
Transit.
What?
That was a push poll.
That was a push poll. What did he say?
Transit.
Transit. Taxes. How many would say property taxes would be your number one issue? Just a few. How about property taxes in your top 3? Just a few. How many of you who came by car would say roads are a bigger issue than mass transit funding? Only one. They're not counterposed necessarily, right? They're not opposed to each other. Any more? What's number one issue in New Jersey for you as a voter this year? Who else?
Education reform.
Education reform. Is that pro-charter or anti-charter?
Reform or funding?
Funding. All right. So.
Yeah, and this is what's come up with people, and not just on the block that I'm covering, but on the blocks across the state. We're going to have the New Jersey Spotlight editor who's working on this project on the air later this week on Thursday, and I've already sort of gotten an email from her to see what's going on with her block. And it was really interesting that this is a more affluent, kind of what we call Republican horse country out on the western part of the state group with a lot of independent voters. And people say on her block that they do not buy Kim Guandano's proposal, that she's proposing what she's calling a circuit breaker, that after 5% of your gross income, you wouldn't have to pay any more property taxes. And the people out there who, are largely affluent are not buying that they don't think that she's going to be able to pull that off. What Phil Murphy's offering is to restore a tax on millionaires, and to close what's called the carried interest loophole, which is basically hedge fund managers don't have to report a whole mess of income, and do a bunch of other things to raise $1.6 billion to fund schools in New Jersey.
And do you have this on your own voting block site, or is the best place to hear the series WNYC.org?
You can find it on our homepage, and you can also go to WNYC.org/voting block. I think. And then we have this other thing. Can I squeeze in one more thing? We have, we're taking your questions to ask the gubernatorial candidates. So we have a form you can fill out, and we're going to do our best to get those questions answered. And we also have a form you can fill out and a toolkit for hosting your own political potluck. So the form is at wnyc.org/askthecandidates, or you can go to our series page and find it there. And I think right now, at this moment, it's on the homepage.
And we did just confirm that your series page is wnyc.org.
Thank you, producers.
Voting block, our producers on the spot. WNYC's New Jersey Public Radio Managing Editor, Nancy Solomon.
Thank you.
This is WNYC FM HD and AM New York, WNJT FM 88.1 Trenton, WNJP 88.5 Sussex, WNJY 89.3 Netcong, and WNJO 90.3 Toms River. We are New York and New Jersey Public Radio. Brian Lehrer with you live in the Greene Space today, and it is time for the latest news, live from the Greene Space stage with Shamita Basu.
Hello, Brian. Hello, Greene Space. With the president in town to address the UN General Assembly, Mayor de Blasio is defending President Trump's right to visit Manhattan whenever he wants. Speaking today on MSNBC's Morning Joe, the mayor said he's sympathetic to complaints about the cost and the traffic headaches, but Trump is welcome here.
This is his home city. I have huge differences with him on policy, right, but it's his home city. And I've said if he feels the need to come here sometimes to connect with the place he grew up, he has that right.
And a heads up, with the president in town, expect heavy traffic congestion, especially in East Midtown today. And the UN General Assembly continues so for the rest of the week as well.
I always love this, by the way. So many of the heads of state come from all over the world this time of September every year to talk about the world's biggest global issues. And it's happening in our backyard, and it's so exciting. And the lead story on the news is always, well, it's the UN, so it's a traffic nightmare.
Look out for the traffic, everyone. What an honor to have this traffic in town. The labor strike involving almost 2,000 Spectrum cable technicians is about to hit the 6-month mark. The company's pension and health care plans are at the core of the dispute. Giovanna Rodriguez was with hundreds of technicians who rallied at Cadman Plaza in Brooklyn yesterday. She says pension negotiations are especially important for the older generation of workers.
I just feel bad for the guys that have been here 20, 30 years. They built the system, and now, what, they can't retire with dignity? I've only been here 9 years. You have guys like him, they've been here their whole lives.
No meetings are currently scheduled between Spectrum and the union, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 3. And did you hear Toys R Us is filing for bankruptcy? The New Jersey-based giant toy retailer says it has voluntarily filed for relief in U.S. bankruptcy court for the Eastern District of Virginia in Richmond. The company says its approximately 1,600 stores will remain open and continue to sell toys while it works with creditors to restructure its debt. And several Harlem Globetrotters will be facing off against a basketball-throwing robot this morning at the Museum of Mathematics here in New York. The exhibit space there is outfitted with cameras and sensors that record and display the height, angle, and velocity every time someone or some robot takes a shot. Cindy Lawrence, the executive director of the museum, who was also on the exhibition's design team, says it's meant to encourage people to think about how to play around with different factors to sink a basket.
America has a love affair with sports and less so with mathematics, and we thought if we could combine the two, we might appeal to an audience that otherwise wouldn't think they would like math.
Lawrence says the museum is collecting and analyzing all of the data from the basketball exhibit. And September is Roald Dahl's birthday month. His actual birthday was last week, on the 13th. The children's book author is known, of course, for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, James and the Giant Peach. You know all his books. He would have turned 101 years old this year. I wonder how many people in this room read Roald Dahl themselves or read it to a kid in their lives. Ooh.
Almost everybody.
More people than who came in by New Jersey Transit, that's for sure. Well, then you'll know one of Dahl's signature moves was his made-up words. and all told, it's said that he coined well over 500 words in his life. And he even coined a word to describe the act of making up words, which was gobblefunk. So all month, in honor of his birthday, public libraries across the city have been hosting movie screenings, book readings. I called up the libraries this morning. They say there's still a few of those events ahead in September, so check the New York and Brooklyn public library sites for those details. But I thought I'd bring you the weather forecast today in language that Roald Dahl himself might appreciate. It's going to be a somewhat ucky-slush day. It would have been more catastrophic, but the effects of Hurricane Jose are expected to pass us to the east. We'll get just a pibbling amount of rain and some wind. Highs will be around 74 degrees. And then by the end of the week, the sun will come out and every human being will reemerge from under their umbrellas and enjoy a completely splendiferous weekend. And if all of that left you totally biff-squiggled, which it may have, all you really need to know for now is we might see some showers today and it's going to be a bit windy. It's 73 degrees now in Prospect Park, Brooklyn, and that's the latest from the WNYC newsroom and from the Greene Space. I'm Shamita Basu.
The pride of Edison, New Jersey, Shamita Basu.
Thank you. Before casting their ballots for a new governor, neighbors in New Jersey are getting together and talking about what issues are important to them.
The crime, the lack of jobs, watching this town die piece by piece.
No businesses.
No businesses.
Tune in this week for stories from our Voting Block Project on Morning Edition and tell us what question you would ask the candidates at wnyc.org/askthecandidate.
Support for WNYC comes from New York Presbyterian, New York's #1 hospital for the past 17 years, according to the 2017-18 rankings by U.S. News & World Report. Amazing things are happening here. Learn more at nyp.org. Hello, Dolly on Broadway. Bette Midler stars through January 14th. Bernadette Peters is Dolly beginning January 20th, now playing at the Schubert Theater. Tickets and information at telecharge.com. Viking Books, publisher of A Column of Fire by Ken Follett, a new novel in the Kingsbridge series that began with The Pillars of the Earth. England is torn apart by religious conflict as a young Queen Elizabeth takes the throne. Available now. WNYC is a media partner of the Food Network and Cooking Channel New York City Wine and Food Festival, presented by Coca-Cola, October 12th through 15th, with more than 80 events benefiting hunger relief. nycwff.org.
It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC, live from the Greene Space, the Jerome L. Greene Performance Space, our ground floor theater here at 160 Varick Street. Thanks again for listening, everybody, and thanks again to the Greene Space audience for coming down today. With us now in the Greene Space is NYU Professor of Philosophy and Law, Anthony Appiah. You may know him best these days as the ethicist in the New York Times Magazine. Some of the questions that he opined on recently are, should I report a teacher's racist Facebook post? And is it okay to fire a Muslim driver for refusing to carry wine? I think we'll talk about both of those. Professor Appiah was on the show recently for his new book, As If, Idealization and Ideals, which looks at the idea that our best chance of understanding society is to be open to a range of imperfect descriptions of the world to create something at least close to truth. It's not quite alternative facts. And some of his other classic works include The Honor Code, How Moral Revolutions Happen, also Cosmopolitanism, Ethics in a World of Strangers, and The Ethics of Identity, so relevant in today's United States. Professor Appiah also has a very global perspective. Born in London, raised in Ghana by his very prominent Ghanaian father, a member of parliament and more, and by his mother, a prominent English writer, scholar, and philanthropist. And his parents' interracial marriage in 1953 is said to be one of the inspirations for the movie in the 1960s, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? And even these days, Professor Appiah teaches both at the NYU campus here in New York and their campus in Abu Dhabi. This man has seen a lot as well as thought a lot. Professor Appiah, welcome back to WNYC and welcome to the Greene Space.
Very nice to be here. Thanks.
And can I ask you a biographical question first?
Of course.
Growing up in Ghana, as I say, your father was very prominent in both law and politics, and your mother's side in Britain had people, I see, all the way up to the House of Lords going back a few generations and helped negotiate the terms of India's independence. How much did growing up with all of that give you a perspective on American politics and political culture when you moved to this country? In other words, are there things most of us can't see because we don't have as much to compare it to as you might have?
I think, I mean, I'm an American now, but one of the, maybe I don't sound like one, but then there's no such thing as what an American sounds like, right? Americans can sound anyway. I'm an American now, but I do think that one thing that I feel is that I didn't grow up here, so I didn't grow up with the kind of piety about the Constitution that I think a lot of serious Americans have. And so, you know, the country that I grew up in, Ghana, had a bunch of constitutions by the time I was growing up. It had military governments and civilian governments and one-party state and multi-party states. We went through a whole bunch of constitutions, and one of the things that I learned from that is that constitutions don't fix anything. Not because you can overrule them, but because to work you have to believe in them, and the people have to make them work, and not just the courts, but the legislators and the government and the people have to believe in them. And so when aspects of our Constitution, like, for example, the Civil War amendments, which say that we're all equal, don't have full support in the population, they don't mean much. And we had Jim Crow in this country for generations after the end of Reconstruction until the Civil Rights Movement. Even though it said in those Civil War amendments that you couldn't deny people equality on the basis of race or previous condition of servitude. So that's one thing I feel. I feel very, and of course in Britain, where my grandfather was in the British Parliament, and so was his father, and for that matter, so was his great-grandfather. In Britain, they don't have a written constitution, and there too, what matters is norms of proper behavior. And one of the things that worries me about our present moment is that the norms that make the system work, that make it an admirable system, are not all written down. And violating some of those unwritten norms is as threatening, I think, to the stability of the Republic as is, you know, trying to violate explicit norms.
What about for you, being a member of the political elite, cultural elite, intellectual elite, if I can call you that, over there, and then you're in America where maybe you were seen at first, and maybe to this day, as black or African, or what are you, Indian? What are you? With all the preconceptions any of those things might suggest. Has that given you a lens on race or identity, and you've written so much about identity, that most Americans might not have?
I think that the discovery, so, I mean, I'm a moderately well-educated person, so I had already heard that there were problems of race in America before I got here. My mother gave me James Baldwin to read when I was a teenager, and I knew who Martin Luther King was, and also Abraham Lincoln. So,
and Robert E. Lee,
and Robert E. Lee, and I have visited the Southern White House in Richmond, Virginia. But that was after I got here. But I was surprised by the everyday reality of racial experience in America, even though I had this kind of theoretical appreciation. And, I mean, actually for me, the most surprising thing was something you might not expect, which was the discovery that my blackness and my African ancestry gave me access to a set of African-American connections and friends, people I hadn't known before, who were incredibly nice to me. So I got the plus side of racial identity very much, as well as some of the negative side. And I haven't really suffered a lot from anti-black racism personally, but I did have this new experience because, of course, in Ghana, it would never occur to you to be nice to somebody because they were black, because everybody's black. So it's kind of weird to think that you would be nice to, you know,
or
be
suspicious of somebody because
or to
they
be
were
suspicious
black.
of somebody because they were black. It'd be like being nice to someone because they were white in Sweden. So I think so it was interesting. And though of course race is now a sort of global thing, and so I don't mean to say that there's no. My mother was white in Ghana; that was noticeable. And I was brown in England. Nevertheless, I think it was a different kind of experience of race when I got here. And I think the recognition that there are these different ways of doing it and that you don't have to do it any particular way is helpful in thinking about, how we move forward.
I think every white person should live as a minority somewhere for at least some of
but
their lives if they can.
Not in Ghana.
Why?
Because Ghanaians are fantastically nice to strangers.
And one of your books is called The Ethics of Identity. How alarming do you find the trends regarding identity on any side in the United States? White identity, as expressed by, pro-Trump white nationalism, is truly frightening for obvious reasons. I'm guessing you'll agree. But then there is also so much debate on the left about whether race and gender and LGBTQ and other identities of oppression, you might say, are becoming too much of the way we construct society and construct our personal identities, is the critique. How alarming to you are any of those things on any side?
I think the only thing that alarms me is when people don't recognize what I think is the most important theoretical fact about identities, which is that they belong to all of us. We make them up. Men and women make masculinity. It's not just made by men. Blacks and whites create the racial categories in the United States. They don't just belong to black people or to white people. Whiteness doesn't belong to whites. Blackness doesn't belong to blacks. These are categories that we use in our interactions with one another, and that means we all have a right to say something about how they're supposed to work. Everybody's entitled. So I don't think it's right to say, for example, that the only people who are entitled to express views about transgender identity are transgender people. No, the transgender identity is an identity in a gender system in which cisgender people are also present, and we have a right too to say things about it. Now, we should construct these identities in ways to make sure that as many people as possible have lives that are as comfortable as possible for them. You shouldn't be nasty about it. And that produces genuine conflicts because some people will be comfortable with one way of doing it and other people will be more comfortable if we change, and we'll have to negotiate that. But the idea that any of these things, as it were, belongs to just one kind of person, that seems to me very unhelpful if we're going to live together in a community of multiple identities.
So how, and if you have the answer to this, you could probably not only be a billionaire but be elected emperor. How do we prevent our politics in a society that's heading for one of no ethnic majority of any kind to evolve along other than ethnically polarized lines? Are there good models?
I think one kind of, well, first of all, we do have civic identities, at least some of us do. I very often think of myself as an American, and that means I'm, sometimes proud and sometimes ashamed of what the country represents and is doing. And in general, the point is that if there's an identity that divides you and me, if a racial identity divides us, there are likely to be other identities that join us. Civic identities, religious identities. Our churches are more multiracial than they used to be. They're still surprisingly racial, given what Jesus seems to have thought about these things. It's a bit surprising that people are so segregated on Sundays. But still, through church identities, through Islam is a good model here because Islam in the United States is fantastically multiracial. So I think that one source of the possibility of resolution of some of the conflicts between identity A and identity B is to remind people that they have other identities in common, and also to remind people that people have interests that aren't necessarily related to their identities. So my interest in having a decent healthcare system is not really a black interest or I'm gay, so it's not a gay interest, it's not a philosopher's interest, it's not a professor's interest. It's just an interest as a human being with a body that was going to need increasing amounts of care as I get older. If I'm lucky, I'll live to need the healthcare system a lot.
So I think this brings us to one of your recent columns as the ethicist in the New York Times Magazine, and I'm struck by how frequently identity relations questions come up, by the way. But the one in July, in particular, is it okay to fire a Muslim driver for refusing to carry wine? What were the circumstances of that?
So it's a very interesting story, and I have to say, to remind myself when I talk about these things, that I know things about this story that I can't say because we try to protect people's identities in these things. I have to try and remember which of the things we said in the letter and which of the things we published in the letter and which we didn't. But the basic idea is there's someone taking a ride in a limo with a Muslim driver, and he stops off to get some wine to take to dinner, and the Muslim driver won't, and asks the driver if he'll carry the box in, and the driver says, no, I won't carry wine. And the next day, the person who wrote the letter, thinking that he'd been a bit unfair to this person, called his boss and said, I want you to tell the guy that I'm sorry that I made a deal about him not carrying the wine, because I understand. And the boss said he made a big deal about you not carrying the wine and fired him. And the boss, by the way, was a Muslim too, so it wasn't someone who didn't, it wasn't that the boss didn't understand what the issue was. Now, in order to make sense of a situation like this, and this is often true with these sorts of situations, you have to understand something about what it means to a Muslim to be asked to carry wine. If you don't know what that means, then of course you can't answer the question how important it is to deny him the right to refuse. And the answer is that while the Quran itself doesn't say that you shouldn't carry wine, there are hadith, that is, the sayings of the Prophet, in one of which he says, it's not just bad to drink it, it's bad to carry it, to sell it, and so on. So some Muslims, but by no means all, interpret that to mean that you shouldn't carry wine, and presumably that means if you're a driver, you shouldn't carry it in the trunk of the car that you're driving, even if you're carrying it for somebody else. That's, I would say, I mean, I don't know what the global figures are, but my guess is that there are many, many Muslims in the world who don't think that, and clearly the Muslim boss of this company didn't think that. What he thought was a good Muslim isn't going to drink, and he isn't going to carry wine for himself. But if it's his job, if as part of his job he's been asked to do something, that he would, if he would carry a suitcase, then he ought to carry a box of wine. My view was that actually the guy, in allowing the guy whose wine it was to put the wine in the car at all, was already making a compromise, and that's how these things work. Right? Because if he'd been super strict, he would have said, I'm sorry, but I can't let you bring the wine in what is my car, a car that I control. And so I thought what he reached was a good compromise. I'll let you put it in, but I'm going to ask you to carry it for yourself. And the person whose wine it was wasn't disabled. He wasn't incapable of carrying the wine himself. And indeed, the man who was the guest in the car didn't think that it was offensive, in fact. And so I urged him to go back to the boss and say, maybe you should say to him it wasn't such a good idea to fire this guy.
Do you know if he did?
I don't. But I can find out.
You had some interesting nuances in that article, like you don't know why stoutly secular types sometimes don't get why adherence to a religious stricture should be treated as anything more than a personal preference.
Right.
Albeit, why should it?
Well, because I think that whether you're religious or not, we live in a society of people of many faiths, and those faiths have deep significance for them, and they have deep significance for them not just as individuals, but as members of communities. One reason why a Muslim isn't going to drink, if he's in the kind of Muslim community that cares about that, is because other Muslims in his community will regard him less well if he does. So he's not just expressing a personal taste, he's expressing a deep value. Now, I'm not a Muslim, so it doesn't mean anything to me. I was baptized a Methodist, so I guess I ought to be against drinking wine, but as it happens, I'm as the Bible would say, a wine bibber. So none of this means anything to me, but I understand that I have around me in my society people for whom these things are very important. And I think, the point of a democracy is to think that everybody matters, and so all of us owe it to the others in our society to try and understand what moves them, and to be respectful of the fact that people are moved by different things.
The first thing I thought of reading that headline, that is the question, is it right to fire a Muslim driver for not being willing to carry wine, is the politics of religious identity as it usually comes up in this country today. Liberals might stand up for respecting the Muslim driver as an instinct because Muslims are so picked on and unfairly reviled in this country today. But then again, the same people might get extremely angry at any, say, Christian baker who refuses to produce a wedding cake for a gay marriage. How much do you see them as analogous to each other?
I think they are analogous. You mentioned one difference, which is that on the whole, I don't think Christians, despite what many Christians currently say, are entitled to regard themselves as the persecuted minority in this country. That seems to me a little bit hysterical. But nevertheless, it is true that some Christians of a conservative bent do feel that the state is pushing back against the ways in which they want to live. But I don't think the issue is whether they're put upon. I think the issue is the one I said. We should try to make sense of and respect the views of our fellow citizens, even when we don't agree with them. So I'm gay, and I would be upset if someone refused to make a wedding cake for me. But I think if it's a sort of small private company and the business is and he's going to have to, as it were, do it himself. Well, I think I feel about that. He should be polite to me.
So the state shouldn't require it as a public accommodation.
I mean, the Supreme Court is going to decide this, and good luck to them, because whatever they do, about 40% of the population will be mad at them. But if they decide that despite the fact that this is a this is a shop which is open to the public, it doesn't have to. There is a right of against being forced to participate in something that is in that way. And he was willing to sell them anything else. He just wasn't willing to make them a wedding cake. That strikes me as, I mean, I don't know why. I wouldn't have sued in those circumstances myself. I would have said, well, there other people can make wedding cakes. Actually, I would have probably tried to make one myself.
but it is illuminating how our sense of identity determines whose side we come down in basically the same situation.
Yeah, I think it's very important to see them as analogous. They're not precisely the same. Yes. They never are. There's always some interesting difference.
And before you go, your new book is called As If, Ideals and Idealization. And I want to ask you, we didn't get to this in our book interview. We think of ideals as a good thing, being idealistic as a positive attribute, but being ideological as rigid and bad. I wonder if you think and how you think they're different.
I think that ideals are useful provided you recognize that you have to live in a real world. And that means that sometimes you can't do what the ideal requires. When people get ideological about things, they often lose track of the fact that this is a world in which there are people with other views, and negotiation and compromise have to go on, and they kind of stick to their guns beyond the point where it seems to me sensible. We probably didn't have much time, but just a story from the British television program Skins, which is about teenagers. There's a Muslim kid and a gay kid who are best friends, and the Muslim kid has been not telling his parents that his best friend is gay, even though he himself is not. Birthday party, gay kid is standing outside refusing to come in. Why won't you come in? Because you won't tell my parents I'm gay. Father comes out, and the boy says and he says, why aren't you coming in? My wife has made the things you like. She's waiting for you to come and eat them. And he says, I won't come in because your son won't tell you something. And he says, well, why don't you let me tell you? Why don't you tell me yourself? And he says, I'm gay. And the guy looks at him and he says, I'm a Muslim, and Islam is very important to me, and Friday's the best day of the week for me, the day of prayer. But I don't know everything. And here's one thing I do know. You are my son's best friend.
And on that, we thank Anthony Appiah, NYU professor of philosophy and law. His new book is called As If, Ideals and Idealization. And you can read him as the ethicist in the New York Times Magazine. Thank you so much. Brian Lehrer on WNYC. We continue live in the Greene Space. Stay with us.
How President Obama could get a laugh with a political motive.
How do we make this funny, but also in a way that has a point of view that says, hey, if you thought this was funny, don't just share it, but go call your senator.
David Litt wrote jokes for President Obama. Now he's written a memoir about that experience and whether surreal politics can be funny anymore. That's next time on The Takeaway, weekday afternoons at 3 on 93.9 FM.
WNYC is supported by Your Part-Time Controller, helping nonprofit organizations with all of their accounting and financial reporting needs. Your Part-Time Controller, the nonprofit accounting specialists. More at yourparttimecontroller.com. WNYC is a media partner of City Parks Foundation's Summer Stage. This Thursday, indie rockers The Head and the Heart perform in Central Park with the Lone Bellow and the Shelters. Doors at 5 p.m., show at 6. Tickets at summerstage.org.
The new book, One Nation After Trump, starts with this sentence: American democracy was never supposed to give the nation a president like Donald Trump. On the next Fresh Air, we talk with the authors E.J. Dionne and Norm Ornstein. They believe that this subsequent period of national soul-searching could lead to an era of democratic renewal. Join us. Today at 2 on 93.9 FM WNYC.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC, live in the Greene Space today. Joan Walsh, National Affairs Correspondent for The Nation, is rejoining us on the Greene Space stage because she's been listening to President Trump's much-anticipated United Nations address, which has been going on during the show, and she's here with a few clips and a quick analysis. Joan, thanks for coming back. Sure, and I'm going to jump right in with a clip because I'm looking at these clips. Of course, I couldn't hear the speech as it was going on, but my eyes are a little bit popping out of my head because this is not a tweet. This is his actual speech to the United Nations General Assembly.
You don't have to worry that I'm going to say he was presidential or that this is the pivot. I just want to put you all at ease.
And he did, as if it was a tweet, call Kim Jong-un Rocket Man.
The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime.
So, Joan, could you tell if there were gasps in the UN General Assembly, like here in our Greene Space audience?
No, people were more subdued. Maybe they couldn't quite believe what they were hearing, and we can. But yeah, what an unbelievable thing to say. And it's hard to take him at his word, but if you just look at his words, Kim Jong-un is on anything but a suicide mission. His goal is preservation of his regime and his people and his crazy notion of his country. So this is no suicide mission. Pledging to totally destroy North Korea, I think that would be a war crime. But I don't think he'll get hung up on those niceties.
How long was the speech, and how would you put that clip we just heard? And we do have two other clips, but how would you put that in the context of the larger presentation?
Since I don't know exactly when he started, I didn't see. I think it was at least 40 minutes. So it was not a short speech. How would I put it in the context? It wasn't all that crazy. And in fact, I saw a headline like in Newsweek. I'm not sure it was Newsweek. I was just looking at Twitter. Donald Trump's speech wasn't totally nuts. So that's what we've gotten to, right? It's like we've got to it's news that it wasn't totally nuts. But the clips you'll hear I think they're nuts enough to call it totally nuts.
And here he is on the Iran deal that President Obama made to prevent that country from developing nuclear weapons.
The Iran deal was one of the worst and most one-sided transactions the United States has ever entered into. Frankly, that deal is an embarrassment to the United States, and I don't think you've heard the last of it, believe me.
And we've heard him say that kind of thing many times, so in a way, no news there. One more clip of about 40 seconds where he says, many nations are going to hell.
Major portions of the world are in conflict, and some, in fact, are going to hell. But the powerful people in this room, under the guidance and auspices of the United Nations, can solve many of these vicious and complex problems. The American people hope that one day soon the United Nations can be a much more accountable and effective advocate for human dignity and freedom around the world. In the meantime, we believe that no nation should have to bear a disproportionate share of the burden, militarily or financially.
Listening to these clips, Joan, I could imagine that a lot of Americans might actually cheer him or at worst shrug and not consider this outrageous and think, Kim Jong-un, if the worst that he does, Trump, is put pressure on him by calling him Rocket Man, I don't know if saying will totally destroy North Korea falls into that same category, but kind of really putting it to Kim Jong-un, okay, he said what he thinks about the Iran deal, and kind of calls it like many people see it, that the UN does need serious reform, well, maybe it's refreshing.
I'm sure it is refreshing. I mean, we talked a little earlier about how most of his base still likes what he's doing, and this is what they sent him, the heir to the White House, to do, was to not be diplomatic. But it really, I mean, it's funny because I think an hour earlier, the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, gave a speech in which he referenced Korea and talked about how it was really time for calm deliberation and for statesman-like behavior. So maybe Donald Trump didn't listen to it. I don't know. The other thematic piece that was kind of interesting and also disturbing is, yes, he did, as he did in that last clip, leave open, there's room for collective action. But much of the speech was touting the greatness of sovereign nations, toughening themselves up, taking care of themselves, and then coming together from a position of strength. There's nothing inherently bad in that, except the way that he repeated it. It sounded like it was very different from the way the UN currently works.
Because the whole idea of the UN is collective action for a safer world, and it sounds like Trump was framing nationalism as the starting point, and then more like bilateral and multilateral one-off kinds
That's
of
exactly what he talked
rather
about.
Rather than the basic premise of the United Nations.
Nationalism and patriotism, it's kind of like peace through strength. It's very much like that. It's like if every nation is sovereign, they take care of themselves. They're nationalists, they're patriotic, rather than we need to actually try to erase some of these boundaries and work for the common good across borders. None of that.
All right, there you go. And you didn't even have to listen to the whole 45-minute speech.
I did it for you. Actually, I didn't listen to the whole thing. I read it. I read a lot of it. But
Joan Walsh, National Affairs Correspondent for The Nation. Please thank her again. And when we come back in just a minute, we will meet the very first dreamer who will be here on our Greene Space stage. And one thing about Tereza Lee, she is a classical pianist. So if you're listening to the show, if you don't know, now you know, you can also video stream the Brian Lehrer Show when we're in the Greene Space. So go to WNYC.org or Facebook and check us out, and you will see Tereza Lee play a little Chopin after we talk about being the first dreamer. Stay with us.
You don't have to be wealthy or retiring to take advantage of tax-smart, charitable planning. Whatever your stage of life or income level, planning now can help protect your assets and create a legacy that secures WNYC's future as an independent service to our community. Learn more about WNYC's Listeners Legacy Circle. Send an email to legacygiving@wnyc.org or call 646-829-5487.
WNYC supporters include Denzel Washington in Eugene O'Neill's The Iceman Cometh on Broadway. George C. Wolfe directs this 14-week engagement. Previews begin March 22nd at the Bernard B. Jacobs Theater. Tickets on sale now at telecharge.com. Metropolitan Entertainment, presenting flamenco-style guitarist Jesse Cook performing at the Concert Hall at New York Society of Ethical Culture on West 64th Street, Saturday, September 23rd. Jesse Cook tickets at ticketfly.com. Urban Stems, offering same-day flower delivery service. Every flower is sourced directly from farms, and delivery is available to homes or offices 7 days a week in New York City. More at urbanstems.com. Happiness delivered.
This is WNYC, 93.9 FM and AM 820. NPR News and the New York Conversation.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC, and with us now we have Tereza Lee. She's a classical pianist, and she's going to play a little music for us. She's also known as the first dreamer. That's right. In 2001, her story inspired Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, to introduce the DREAM Act, the first piece of legislation to advocate for legalizing young immigrants brought to the U.S. illegally by their parents. Here's Dick Durbin talking about Tereza's story on the Senate floor in 2014.
The DREAM Act all started with this young lady, Tereza Lee, Korean, brought to the United States at the age of 2, grew up in a poor family in Chicago, and had an amazing musical talent, was accepted at the Manhattan Conservatory of Music and the Juilliard School of Music, and because she was undocumented, had no place to go. Her mother called our office, her mother, who incidentally worked night and day in a dry cleaning establishment in Chicago, and said, what can we do? The law had no real answer other than to say to this then 18-year-old girl, go back to where you came from for 10 years and try to come here legally. That was the law. I introduced the DREAM Act, and since then we've seen a growth in support for this because it is only fair. You cannot, should not, hold children responsible for the decisions and wrongdoing of their parents. These kids deserve a chance.
Dick Durbin on the Senate floor in 2014. Tereza Lee is now a doctoral candidate and faculty member at the Manhattan School of Music and an advocate for immigrant rights. And because this is a story about how the love of music inspired political action, here to help me interview Tereza is music lover Elliot Forrest, who is the weekday afternoon host on our classical station, WQXR. Hi, Elliot. Thank you so much for partnering with me on this.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian. It's great to be here.
And Tereza Lee, welcome to WNYC.
Thanks for having me.
So we just heard from Senator Durbin how powerful your story was to him, how it inspired him. What was that story from your point of view? How did you reach out or get reached out to by Senator Durbin?
Well, I'll tell you as quickly as I can. When I was about 16, I was of age to start looking into colleges, and my artistic director, Ann Monaco at Merit School of Music, she approached me and asked, what colleges are you planning on applying to? And she was assuming that I would say something like Juilliard or Manhattan School of Music or one of the art conservatories. And because, I had just won a big competition, I got to perform the Tchaikovsky Piano Concerto with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. And I had started sort of a performance career during my teen years. And I told Ann Monaco that I'm not going to college because I didn't tell her why, but in my mind, I wasn't going to college because I was undocumented, and I had the notion that because I was undocumented, colleges won't accept me, and that was true at that time. Today, the colleges are different across the country. But Ann Monaco proceeded to say, what are you thinking? I'm going to print out 10 application forms for you right now. And so she gave them to me and asked me to fill them out as best as I could and bring them back to her. So I did. I brought them back to her the next day and filled them out as much as I could. And she saw on my application forms that I was actually born in Brazil. And, I look Asian, so that confused her. Then she saw my Social Security number box was empty. She said, go back home to your parents and ask them for your Social Security number. And I said, okay.
And that was extremely emotional for you, right, to take that back? What happened that night?
Absolutely. And so actually that night, I didn't even show it to my parents. I just brought them back to her the next day, empty as it was the day before. And she said, why is this empty? And I said, it was very emotional. I was hysterical. And I
was in tears, and I told her, please don't report me to the police.
And you hadn't come out to anybody at that point. No one knew that your teachers, no one knew you. You were undocumented at that point.
That's right. So
you had
she
kept that secret as a family.
We knew our entire childhood, since I was a young kid, and we had to keep this quiet because if anyone knew, our parents, our friends, or you just didn't know who was going to turn us in and separate our family apart.
I was going to say, just briefly, if you could, South Korean family, you were born in Brazil, then moved to the United States. What was the reason for this trajectory?
Well, a reason, just like many people that migrate, because of the aftermath of the Korean War. There was a lot of destruction, and it was almost a third world country in Korea at that time. And my parents took this chance to start over in South America. And then they were robbed completely, and if you can believe it, by a family member. And so they had to start over. And this time they started over in Chicago.
Our time is going so quickly, and I know you're going to play for us. So here we are at this moment where the Trump administration just rescinded DACA. Some would say Trump won the election because of his extreme anti-immigrant stance, though there's a debate about whether he's trying to save it by putting it into Congress and all of that. But the target generally is immigrant Mexicans. And I'm curious, what does it mean to you that you are, in a way, the poster child for the DREAM Act, the first dreamer, but some might say too idealized an immigrant for the movement's own good? Korean, not Mexican, a classical pianist, elite in the Western tradition, a model minority, quote unquote, to use that expression. Does your story make it harder for people to be ordinary and still perceived by the white public as deserving DACA?
That's a great question. So first of all, immigration in the country is not a Mexican problem. It's not a Latino problem. It's a worldwide problem. Obviously, I'm not Latina, but a lot of Asians are also undocumented. A lot of European immigrants are undocumented. We have undocumented activists that are out of the shadows, as they call it, from Latvia, from France, from Germany. We're undocumented from countries from all over the world.
How much activism do you do?
I do a lot of activism day and night, and I've been working locally in Uptown Manhattan and New York State level. I've been pushing for the Liberty Act, which was a legislation this past year that would make New York a sanctuary state. And we worked so hard, and just on Friday, actually, this is a little glimmer of good news, is that Governor Kwame announced an executive order stating that New York is a sanctuary state, and by limiting cooperation between local and federal agents.
What are you going to play for us?
I will play for you a piece by Frederic Chopin, who was French immigrant in Poland, and he went back to Paris later in his life, and this is a piece by him called Fantasy Impromptu.
And as Tereza moves to the Greene Space piano, Elliott Chopin, maybe the greatest composer for piano of all time.
Absolutely. I mean, the amount of music that Chopin wrote specifically for a solo piano is known by a lot of people, but he also wrote a lot for piano and orchestra as well.
Tereza Lee, known often as the first dreamer, playing Chopin's Fantasy Impromptu here in the Greene Space.
That was really beautiful. We talked about having Teresa play, if she wanted to, Stephen Foster's Beautiful Dreamer, but this was really lovely. Can we give away? It feels like a happy ending for you, so that people know you're actually now an American citizen. You're married an American. You have 2 children. You're not going anywhere.
No, I am here to stay for sure.
And what was it like to play on the Greene Space stage compared to Carnegie Hall, where you've also performed?
Oh, this is quite an honor.
What was that circumstance that you played Carnegie Hall? When was that?
I won a competition a few years ago, and I was at Manhattan School of Music, and one of the prizes was to perform live at Carnegie Hall.
And of all the talk lately of the president rescinding DACA and having President Obama initially pass it, has it just been confusing for the people you're working with?
And we have 15 seconds.
All right, to answer that question.
Is it confusing for people?
Yeah, for the
yes, well, Trump is a wild card, as we all know. And we just don't know what's going to come out from the White House. Yeah.
And somehow we segue from
Chopin
to the Brian Lehrer Show closing theme. Tereza Lee, now at the Manhattan School of Music. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Elliot Forrest, the afternoon host on WQXR. Brian Lehrer, live in the Greene Space on WNYC.
Support for WNYC comes from Cabot Cheese, a farmer-owned co-op offering Cabot cracker cuts, pre-sliced cheeses available in resealable packages in 6 varieties. More information at cabotcheese.com. Irish Repertory Theater, presenting Brian Friel's The Home Place, in which liberties taken in the name of science push an Irish village past its breaking point.